Welcome to Cybersecurity Sense, a weekly podcast providing updates and insight into the latest in cybersecurity, brought to you by LBMC Information Security. Now, here's your host.
Hi, I'm Bill Dean with LBMC Information Security. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy this content as much as you've enjoyed the previous content. As in the past, as we've been doing, we are going to have a special guest on. For this episode, our guest will be Nancy Spizzo, that is a senior manager in our high trust practice. Before we get into the meat of today's topic, I want to thank you, Nancy, for taking some time to speak with us today. If you don't care, take a minute or so and introduce yourself to everyone.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me on this morning. It's a great opportunity to share some ideas on how we're going to return to work in our new normal. But as you said, I'm a senior manager here at LBMC in our information security practice. And I've been working with our clients in their overall governance, compliance, and security needs, and most notably high trust. And I've been doing audits of almost every type of business, large and small, almost probably 1,000 audits by this time. And really have had some good opportunities to have insight into organizations' business continuity and return to work plans, as we're going to talk about this morning.
Sure, thank you. Well, I guess go ahead and getting into the topic that you brought up there. Just based on your observations, how do you feel the shift of working from home has went? It came really quickly. You know, it seemed like on a Monday it was business as usual, and the next Monday everyone has to be home. How do you think that kind of went overall?
I think we were pretty much a remote workforce to begin. I think a lot of organizations had set up their critical workers to be remote workers at some point, either through illness or vacation. So I think what we did in mass was what we did on smaller scales much of the time. But I did talk to some organizations that had some struggles as we went out into our remote working situations. And overall, though, Bill, I think that transition went well because I think our IT brothers and sisters, even though they knew there were going to be challenges, they knew what those challenges were going to be, and back in the back of their minds had a pretty good idea of how to resolve them in a pinch. So I think the overall transition to home went pretty well. And I think it taught us a lot of things too.
I agree. I personally have been very impressed with how well the IT teams handled that. Even ours at LBMC, they did a phenomenal job. And speaking with clients, everything seemed to went well. Even those that weren't ready to send 98% of their workforce home, everything seemed to go pretty well. So, I lead our pen testing practice, and a lot of our clients did not want pen testing while that transition was occurring. And I completely agreed. The last thing we would have wanted to do was to cause an issue. But I've been impressed with how well it went. I've also been extremely impressed with the internet service providers and the internet backbone, because not only did you have a workforce that went home, you also have people streaming video all day long. I've not really heard of any issues. I've got a habit every time before I start a podcast or do a webinar or something like that. I'll check my bandwidth, and I haven't really seen a drop in it. There'll be some peaks and some spikes, but overall, I've been really impressed with how they've handled that. What are your thoughts there?
I think you're absolutely right about all of those things. I think as we expect in business continuity plans, when you have an event, you suspend secondary tasks and focus on the event. And I think that's exactly what the industry did. And as soon as they transitioned and they had that new normal of work from home base, Bill, I'm seeing organizations, even as a remote workforce, start up their pen testing and vulnerability activities again, because as we work from home, we want to know what those vulnerabilities and pen tests are. So even yesterday, I was on one of those calls where we're ready to start that operation back up, which is super impressive.
Yeah, same here. I explained to our team that they have a little bit of downtime to work on some of their pet projects for a couple of weeks, but I explained to them that it's not going to last long and business will get back to usual soon, and we're going to be really busy. That started happening probably about 3 weeks ago. All the clients are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
They want their work rescheduled. We've got new work coming in. So it was a small impact, but I think we're going to be pretty good with that. And also, I failed to mention it earlier. I've been impressed with the collaboration platforms, whether it's Slack or Teams or WebEx or Zoom specifically. They weren't ready for that type of load either. Some of them struggled for a couple of days, but they seem to have gotten things back up and going and everything going well. We do have a podcast on some of the security issues that Zoom has experienced, but overall, I think they've done a really good job also.
I'm hearing great things about Zoom.
Yeah,
I think when we come out of this, we're going to see some great ingenuity out of companies like Zoom and WebEx and maybe some of the others, where they're going to see that really there's going to be some great features, and I think enhanced features, because these type of events seem to drive that kind of creative thinking.
exactly.
I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, me too. So, we've kind of touched on, returning. While schedules are going to differ heavily based on geography and whether you're in a hotspot or not, but we will someday return to an office, I hope. I love when people ask how it's going. I love working from home. I don't like having to work from home. I like it when it's an option, not a necessity. So I'm looking forward to when I can go back and see my coworkers again. But what things do you feel organizations are going to need to do to prepare for this? And I'm air quoting return to work process. What do you see happening there?
I I think we're in unprecedented, uncharted territory here when it comes to this area. And I have many, many thoughts, as you know, from my white paper that we're putting out on the website soon. There are just so many dynamics to returning to work. We don't know a lot about what this event is going to take, and this event turns out to be a pandemic scaled virus, but any type of event could have this effect on us. But the virus, as we're hearing, may come and go, and it may affect organizations geographically. It may start having a different pattern altogether as we return to work in shifts. So I think we just don't know, and I think that's what organizations have to prepare for, is the unknown. We may come back to the office, we may transition back home, we may transition parts of our departments back to the office and not others. I think organizations really have to take a good look at themselves and say, what's going to make sense for us? What's going to be our most risk tolerant, risk averse approach? Where is our risk tolerance level to returning to work? And then rally all of the different departments that have a component of decision making in these unprecedented event scale type things, and consider all the factors. And I think we just don't know what we don't know yet about this return to work operation. I think I've heard some of my contacts say they'll transition partial departments at a time. They'll phase in percentages of workers. They may keep some percentage of workers at home because that would keep them safe and have a risk based approach to returning to the office. But yeah, I think we're just in unprecedented territory, Bill, on all of the questions that organizations have to ask themselves.
Very good points. What are some of the specific areas that you feel that they're going to need to consider as they begin to transition back to an office at some point?
Yeah, Bill, we've had lots of discussions with some of our organizations who've sought our advice on what we're hearing, what we're seeing. If you just take the outward in, maybe more domain or business categories, starting from the outside in, physical security, you could need to look at your badge readers and think about adjusting hours of operations on elevators and doors based on a phased or rotating schedule of workers. You might have 10 workers come in the morning and 10 in the afternoon, but not all 20 together. So I think there's some physical security things to think about. I think also with fewer traffic in the office, you might have more doors and windows that might need to be locked. And then as you transition out of the physical security, thinking about that end user equipment, I don't know, Bill, about you, but how many organizations did we hear that had to fire up their vendors to send end user equipment out to their remote workforce who maybe didn't have a chance to grab a laptop or have that remote technology? I think there's some cleanup around that area as those devices come back into the offices. Some of those devices, we may not have had the luxury of imaging that end user equipment appropriately, and it may have foreign software on it, or it may not have the security software that it may need to look and feel like and be traced by our organizations. So I think there's some things we have to think through, and of course every organization is going to be unique and the challenges they faced and where they set priority. But even downstream from those things, thinking about if that end user equipment wasn't configured properly or registered in our asset inventory properly, how do we go back and do those things now and take that inventory and make sure that end user device is properly logging into our overall logging programs? There's just so much to think about here. It can feel overwhelming until you start documenting the ins and outs of it. And I say teamwork makes the dream work. Using an overall team approach, many heads are better than one, and just making sure you have an overall team looking at all the issues and documenting it.
Well, it sounds like we should publish something to have all the specifics as to what they need to be looking for. And I know you're working on that. So hopefully we'll get that published soon and be able to put that link into the show notes for the show. I asked this question to a lot of people, and I'm really interested, Nancy, in your opinion. Do you think things are ever going to go back to being the same as they were before?
Oh, I hope not. With every crisis or event, it poses an opportunity to learn something different and make improvements. And I think to think positively through that I think we have learned so much about how we can connect remotely, how we can keep our businesses working remotely. And I think we've just learned so much being a remote workforce. I think it's allowed some people to demonstrate higher efficiency in working. I think it's, for some that need that office interaction, and certainly there's a need to collaborate in person. I think we're going to look at those interactions differently going forward, at least for the next year. But just in overall, I think we've learned that from a culture perspective that, staying home when you're sick is not just a terrible thing. You're actually doing a good thing, and it may help support some of those changes going forward, but also keep people productive.
Yeah, I know a lot of our clients, including LBMC, at our Nashville office, we have the hoteling concept in which if you just come in, grab the first work area in your little section that you want to work in. I don't think that's going to be happening in the future. I think a lot of these open workspaces and shared workspaces, I think that's a thing of the past because if you think about how often we're going to have to sanitize those areas and people are just not going to be comfortable doing that. So it's little things like that I don't think are ever going to be the same again. I do feel that a lot of organizations, long term, I think commercial real estate is probably going to feel a little bit of a hit because workers are now saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to go to the office to be productive.
Hmm.
I think if some companies were to begin to force their employees to return to work, people may make job decisions based on how they handle the workforce because it's easy to look back over this 3 month period that we're at home and say, I was just as productive at home as what I'm at the office. Why are you forcing me to come back to an office again? So I don't know
Hmm.
what that's going to look like moving forward, but it's definitely going to be interesting. A lot of people want to go back to the office. I want to go back to the office, but I just think things are going to be different.
I think you're right about that. I think there are some other dynamics to think about in what you just said, Bill. First of all, I hear that that's going to be a great interview question for job candidates. How did you handle social distancing? How did you handle your remote workforce? and looking for those great companies that handled that remote working well. I think those companies are certainly going to benefit. I think there's another category of risk that is about to emerge that we haven't seen before. And I don't know what to call it, but it is related to a person's health and how they share that with their organizations, and then how the organization incorporates that person's health into their overall risk profile. And I think there's a category of workers that have underlying health conditions that make them more susceptible. And there's just hasn't been that need to share that underlying health information with your employer before. Think of things like diabetes. Most people handle that on their own. Obesity. We have those with asthma. We have those with pregnant wives or caring for an elderly parent at home. And I think all of those risk factors for a person will now get incorporated into their employer. And I think there's risk there that we have to think beyond just having a person come in and touch another person's stapler or touch a printer after someone else has touched a printer. There's much more to that person that's going to be going on as they come back to work. So I just think you're so right about hoteling is not going to look like it did before. I think sharing offices is not going to look like it did before. And it's going to be really interesting to see how those other components of the person now come back into the workforce. So I'm really looking forward to the changes about how, and again, seeing how privacy now is going to work with HR, who will now need to work with IT, because I think the three are going to become really good friends in the next 6 months.
One interesting note that I've found through this is the personality types. Of course, our technical team, sizable, very talented. We mainly worked from remote anyway. A couple of us went to the office just because we like to be around each other. But one thing I found really, I'm still finding interesting is this has not been very difficult on the extroverts on my team. They knew what was coming. They realized that they're going to have to find a way to interact with people because I'm an extrovert. I get my energy from people.
Mm,
The introverts, on the other hand, didn't realize how much human interaction that they do really like. I joke, I've
mm.
got one particular introvert. What used to be a 2-minute conversation in his office is now a 45-minute video call, and we're talking about the neighbor's yard. He just needs that interaction that he was getting before that he's not getting now. So I think it's been harder on the introverts, especially on my team, because they didn't realize how much human interaction that they really did enjoy having.
That is a really good point, Bill. You probably know this. I have been a remote worker for 12 years, and you have that interaction of extrovert versus introvert in the office. And you are so right about the differences and how that has come out in the interactions with workers. I think that interaction is really important to capture as we go forward because introvert or extrovert or whatever type of interaction you need to collaborate, to energize your workday, those type of things still have new avenues, right? Those people of either energy source are learning new ways to adapt that. And I think also we're all learning how incredibly important our families are. We're learning how critical they are to connect with. And I've heard lots of great stories of people connecting with their families more. Dinner table discussions are happening more. Children are watching their parents work and having new appreciations for different activities and different career paths. They're having more interactions with web with their coworkers and sharing those experiences more. So I think the energy source and the way we work together is important, but I'm also very excited to see how our next generation of workers are going to come into the workforce and how they're going to have different appreciations for the different jobs that they're able to now see their parents working in.
Definitely. Well, this has been great. And again, I encourage everyone to go to lbmcinformationsecurity.com and read the entire, I've referred to it as a blog post. Nancy's also referred to it as some as a white paper. It's somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of content there. I strongly encourage, because there are checklists and there are more details on how this is going to look based on how we're looking at it now and what Nancy's hearing from her clients. And the same comes from the other consultants that are helping with that a little bit. Again, just thank you, Nancy. I'm sure the listeners have really gotten a lot of value out of this, because I definitely have. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh, sure, Bill. I think we're doing a little bit of tea leaf reading here as we go forward, all of us. And I think what you and I've talked about this morning about having those interactions with as many people as we can, even remotely, is going to help us all work through the next 2 weeks, month, and year in a way that's going to, on the other end of this, make our organizations just so much better and stronger. So thanks for inviting me this morning. Thanks for highlighting this topic. And thanks for really allowing us to have this medium to share with so many people about all the things that are going to be great coming out of this event.
Well, and thank you, Nancy. And for everyone listening, thank you also. Please tune in next time for our episode. As always, if you have a particular topic that you'd like to hear, please contact me, as others do. Send it to me at bdean@lbmc.com. To learn more about LBMC Security and the services that we provide, please visit lbmcsecurity.com and have a great week.